Thank you very much, folks. Folks, please, for a quick conversation, I'd like to welcome, first of all, our Upper West Side Shaliach, who I believe grew up right next door to where this all happens. Hi, Piasezky. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And from ELEM, please welcome Lenore, the president. You'll recognize her from the film. I'll just note, unrelated to the film as we get settled, that you saw the film was dedicated to Leon Edry. Leon Edry was one of the partners of United King Films, who is the leading producer and distributor of Israeli cinema. They are giants within Israel, and they produce this film, and they themselves come from the peripheries of Israeli society. They come from down south, from Dimona, the two Edry brothers, who run this huge international company now, and Leon sadly passed away this past year, and this film was produced by United King, which means that they are pushing this film. They're giving this film. This is not a movie that's just going to be shown in a little corner of Israeli society, but they own what's called the Cinema City complexes. They own all these like huge multiplexes, and this film will be shown in their multiplexes, which is, I think, a great way to expose the peripheries to the rest of Israel. Over to you guys now. The director attempted to bring a human story here of what we hear about in the news. Do you think he was successful?
I'm like from the other side of the road. I live in a small moshav, about 10 minutes driving from there. And it's basically the same story in the big environment. And when someone asks me about this region, I always say that this is, for 340 days a year, this is the best place in Israel. But for the rest 25 days, it's the worst. So I think that the film definitely showed the huge contrast between the good times and the bad times. And yes, and it definitely showed that, you know, these are kids from low social economical layers, and yet, on top of that, they have this issue. So I think it's, in a way, it's in a perfect way showing us what's going on there.
Lenore, would you say this was youth in distress in Israel,
yes, this is a
common example?
This is youth in distress in Israel, and it does touch on a variety of different issues. Yes, of course, the horrific situation goes on with the rockets and the PTSD and the stress that the kids live under. But as you pointed out, also the socioeconomic, also the religious, the conflicts between those who want to go into army, those who don't want to go into army, being pushed into early marriages. And we see that obviously here, and this was Caucasian, but we also see this, you know, with the Bedouins that we work with. We see this with religious groups that we work with. We see this in lots of different pockets. And not in this situation, but in many of the situations, these kids end up leaving home. Sometimes they're pushed out. Sometimes they choose to leave. And then where do they go? And that's where ELEM comes in. We see this also with kids who are coming out of the closet, whose families either push them out or they have chosen to leave. Where do they go? That's where ELEM comes in. We see this with every ethnic and socioeconomic group in Israel, which is why we have so many kids on the streets. And last year alone, ELEM worked with over 122,000 kids throughout Israel in 78 different programs in 43 different cities. It's a big problem. It's a problem that is growing, and as I think you pointed out, you know, how young the population is. That I read recently on a Yom Ha'atzmaut email that was sent around, so I haven't fact-checked the number exactly, but roughly 40% of the general population of Israel is 18 and under, and of all the youth in Israel, 1/3 is on the at-risk spectrum, which is quite a lot, particularly for a small country. It's a lot of kids. So it's a serious problem, it's a growing problem, and we need help to address the problem.
I'll ask one more question, and then we'll open it to some questions from the audience. But we only have time for a few. We have another film coming in and a reception upstairs. But taking away the element of the rockets within Sderot, does Sderot stand out as a town in Israel other than that? Or is that really what defines the youth there? Is that really what defines the life within Sderot?
So I was privileged to grow up in a tiny community next to Sderot before the rockets time. And back then, Sderot is well known for the music industry. In the beginning of the film, we heard a song, something in Moroccan or something like that. This is a very famous Israeli band called Knesiat HaSechel, and they coming from Sderot. There's also a lot of very famous artists coming from Sderot, and Sderot is also very cultural. So, the Kafkazi community, we saw not such a good side for them, but it's a very interesting community, and this community is huge in Sderot. So the complexities of Sderot definitely there, and I would say, if I'm comparing Sderot to Dimona, I would say Dimona is in a worse place than Sderot. Today, people still coming to live in Sderot, although it's this situation, because Sderot is relatively close to Tel Aviv, and it's a great train there, and when it's quiet, it's very good. And I think that choosing to deal with films and movies and cinema in Sderot is because of the huge college just next to Sderot, which is Bichlelet Sapir College, and it's really inflating each other. It's a huge thing. Actually, I think that 2 years ago, the school for cinema moved from within the college to the center of the city of Sderot. And this is something that's growing, and it's started back then, and now it's still there. Even if you take out this terrible mass of rockets, there's something very, very unique, I think, in this city.
I'll mention here that we showed a few years ago a film called Rock in the Red Zone, which was a documentary about Sderot and the music scene there specifically, which really happens in those underground bunkers in the Miklatim. They have turned them into music studios,
like the one that we saw.
Yeah, that was a real music studio, and it's really developed like that. And of course, the cinema coming out of that whole region has turned into a major voice within Israel.
And building on that, ELEM always likes to begin where the kids are, and since music and art and the culture is so important, the ELEM projects that we have in Sderot are all built upon that. We have music rooms, and we have things that get donated, and kids make music, and they have their space to explore. And music and art is just one of the many ways that these kids get to have some release of the stress and tensions that they live under every day. As part of the film was describing, do you ignore their reality, or do you let them express their reality as a way to cope? Are we burying emotions under the rug, or are we putting them out to air? And so these are actual case studies that ELEM sees and ELEM deals with on the street, and in our programs, in our drop-in coffee houses where the kids can go to, after-school programs, and various projects that we have.
It's wonderful. We have time really for one question from the audience. She had her hand up first. We'll engage our audience too, and then we'll continue this conversation at a reception on the 7th floor in the Beit Midrash.
Hi.
And we have lots of food. Please come. We need people to eat it.
Is this on? Yes. I just wanted to acknowledge the community of Sderot. I was there during the war in July of 14 and got to see the wonderful building some donors put up for the kids to play in. The top floor is all therapy. The kids and their parents see these therapists all day and night. And the way they built the place was first with carpeted flooring, and then they realized that the children couldn't make it to the safe room in time. So they ripped up the carpeting and put down linoleum so they could run faster. It's really stressful. And in addition to that, I wanted to say one thing about the people, and that is when I went down to somewhere in a bushy area before the army was going into Gaza, into the tunnels to destroy them. A bomb came in, a rocket came in, we were running from that. We visited the boys, we gave them all kinds of food. There's no army base down there. So what the people of Sderot did was incredible. I was so proud. Everybody that lived there left their doors open before the boys went into Gaza. So because there's no place to eat or shower or sleep, they left their doors open so the army boys could come in and use their homes. And I just was so touched by that. So as much as there's so much pressure there and the kids are having a really hard time, we did art projects with them.
Ma'am.
It was amazing.
Any comment, reaction?
You know, there's the bright side and the dark side, I guess, in every cloud. And we see this kind of banding together quite a bit, and particularly in times of stress.
I just want to acknowledge that when we talk about the Western Negev region today in Israel, we talk about a whole region with PTSD syndrome, which is something unusual in I think worldwide phenomena. And this is something that you all should know. A very good friend of mine, she has a 16-year-old daughter, and she still sleeps with her during nights because of the situation. And it's tons and tons and tons of other stories. So it's just something that's worth acknowledging.
And that's actually a perfect point to mention that the director himself was saying that this is a community with PTSD, but likes to say that in some ways this speaks to Israel at its entirety. And he noted that it was specifically that this is a community that's stuck in a kind of no solution situation. And he'd say that this community is definitely not alone in Israel, and that's a bigger question that we can attempt to answer and continue to discuss both here and other situations, but more specifically upstairs on the 7th floor in the Beit Midrash. I do not recommend exiting this way because there are about 200 people waiting to come into the next film. I recommend going up the stairs and then taking the elevator up to the Beit Midrash. Look for the folks with the blue lanyards who are from ELEM and get involved. Thank you both so much.